Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's late night happy hour, Lando Lakers crossover edition. Brian Kamenetzky, Andy Kamenetzky. It was ring night. Ring night at Staples Center, the Lakers versus the Clippers. And Andy, the Lakers, following the championship formula from last year to a T, lose the opener to the Clippers, and then presumably go win another title.
Well, the opportunity is still there, if nothing else. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, as every coach will tell you, because they love this cliche. It's one game at a time.
Right. Andy, as the old expression in the NBA goes, it's just one of 72.
Yes, indeed. They've been saying that for eons. But, yeah, the Lakers end up losing 116, 109. They've been down by 22 and fought their way back into it. They really just got off to a dreadful start. But, picked it back up again. There were some bright spots. There were some things that, again, keeping in mind one game in and nothing necessarily means anything of permanence.
I don't know about that.
But there are some things that you look at and go, all right, that's going to need some fixing. That's going to need some tweaking. But, they got 71 more to do it.
All right. So, as always, every Land of Lakers podcast brought to you by the folks at betonline.ag. The NBA, Andy, and college basketball are back. I knew the first part. I wasn't so aware of the second part, but it's good to know. The NFL college football playoffs right around the corner. With all these sports going on, plenty of bets to lock in. So if you're thinking about picking the Lakers to repeat their NBA championship, it's okay still, even after tonight. Or someone to upset Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs, go to betonline.ag. From point spreads and totals to team player and coaching props, BetOnline gives you more options to wager than any place online. There's always also the online casino, never closes. Head online to BetOnline AG today. Take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses. Again, that's betonline.ag. Sign up today. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Land of Lakers podcast, also brought to you by the folks at Delicious Pizza. 2 locations, West Adams and up on Sunset in Hollywood. Tell them the Cam Brothers sent you. Get yourself 20% off your pizza. You're supporting local business. You are supporting a huge Lakers fan in the owners of Delicious Pizza. And of course, again, that's carry out or delivery. Cam Brothers, get yourself 20% off. So Andy, like you say, 116-109 final score. The Clippers win. Big nights, both from Kawhi Leonard and particularly Paul George, who I think came into this one with a little bit of a chip on his surgically repaired shoulders. 13 of 18, 33 points for Paul George. So we'll talk about him, talk about Kawhi as the show goes on. The Lakers did not get nearly as much from their stars, 22 from LeBron, 18 from Anthony Davis. But I kind of want to start with the ring ceremony, because this was really cool. Remember in the draft, we talked about it, like the NFL draft, the NBA draft, why don't they do more of this at home, where people are surrounded by their families and you can see how deeply meaningful it is for these people to be with the people who brought them to this place. I spent the entire ring ceremony going, why haven't families been giving their players rings since the dawn of time? It was awesome.
Well, I mean, a lot of things, the explanation is because that's the way we've always done it, in terms of you always have David Stern or Adam Silver be the guy who just does the laundry line procession of giving each person their individual ring. And while it's certainly nice for the players involved, and it's a little bit different if you've got a full arena of people cheering.
I get it, and on all these things, but some the principle, just what they did tonight. And if you missed it, the Lakers started off first by having assistants and team staff given their presented virtually their rings by people at UCLA health frontline workers in the COVID fight, which was a really cool touch. And then, I mean, honestly, Andy, you could tell the players and coaches didn't know, because at least it seemed that way, because Frank Vogel, he looked teary. I was teary watching Frank Vogel get his ring presented to him virtually by his daughters and his wife. It was really cool.
Yeah. I mean,
it went on from there.
Look, there's no more emotional connection than you can have for any of these guys, or even the assistant coaches who didn't get their rings from family, but got them from frontline workers during the pandemic. I mean, there was an acknowledgement of, and I thought this was really smart by the Lakers, there was an acknowledgement of, This is different. It's not normal. So you know what? Let's really lean into it and embrace what's different about it, and then try to figure out, okay, what makes it different? The pandemic. Okay, we're going to acknowledge the pandemic in the way that we hand out some of these rings. What else is different? Everybody, these players don't have their family and friends with, or their family with them and their children with them to see this historic night for them in their careers. All right, let's find out the best way to do it from there. And this is just a reminder that when it comes to big events, whether it's something like tonight with the ring ceremony, or frankly, something really tragic like honoring Kobe the way they did at the beginning of the year after his passing, the Lakers are just really, really good at this sort of stuff.
Yep.
They really understand.
They do it better than anybody. And it's not, and it's, I saw, obviously they know how to put on a ring ceremony. They've got a lot of practice, but it's not just that. It's every kind of significant event, and we talked about it on the last podcast when we were talking about Kuzma, and the attraction that it is for around the league for a team like the Lakers. They say, oh yeah, we take care of our guys. Rob Pelinka pointed it out in the press release. He's one of the guys that we grew from, and developed from, we drafted him and we're investing in him. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the money stuff doesn't matter more. I'm not stupid and I'm not naive. Stuff like this also matters. Like when you talk about what attracts teams to the Lakers, if you're a player who wants to go win a title and things like, you can picture yourself in one of these Lakers moments, Lakers ceremonies, like that if you end up in a big moment like that, it's going to be done by your organization in the best way possible. And that is, I think, an underrated part.
Well, okay,
what attracts players or can attract players to the league.
I was going to say can attract them, assuming you're good. And the reason I bring this up is because in the earlier part of the past decade, or the mid 2015, sort of that period, the Lakers were counting on exceptionalism and
I'm glad you brought this up.
They were counting on that sort of pageantry and that sort of spectacle to paper over the fact that they weren't very good, they weren't very well run, and they weren't making good decisions as an organization, and just that the Laker brand would ultimately win out. And the Lakers learned the hard way, no, that's not how it works. Mm-hmm. If other teams around the league are better, Lakers history and being in LA is not automatically going to bring players there. I mean, it happened to, not entirely, but in part, be the case for LeBron. But that also happens to be a very specific part of LeBron's career, towards the end where he's thinking about what comes next. But once you are great, if you are great again, like the Lakers are right now, and if you are very well run, like the Lakers are right now, that's like the best form of exceptionalism that can be the cherry on the top when it comes to the Lakers.
Here's the thing, though, but it's born in competence. Like we got a tweet this morning from some guy who was super snarky, and I'm not even going to bother going back and finding it because it would take too long to scroll through it. But he talked about, when are you guys going to write another thing about Lakers exceptionalism and the death of Lakers exceptionalism? And I tweeted back, because we both wrote about that a lot over the course of the really, really lean and shitty years. And then as they were sort of trying to get their way back and all this stuff, we talked a lot about Lakers exceptionalism and this concept and what it is and whatever. And all I tweeted back to this guy was, the meme from The Princess Bride, which is, you keep saying that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Because Lakers exceptionalism, like you said, Andy, was this thing that was created as if the Lakers were magical, there was something inherent about Lakerness that just made them like God ordained it, that they would always be good, and that wonderful thing would have. Lakers exceptionalism was built in hyper competence. That's why they were always good. They got lucky at times. All teams get lucky, here and there. How do you take advantage of it? The Lakers were always hyper competent. Then they became hyper incompetent. And you know what they are again? They are hyper competent again Rob Pelinka has done a very good job over the last couple of years. He has proved people like me who questioned how good he might be at this job. He is currently in the process of proving that my doubts and people like that weren't fair, or maybe weren't accurate, or whatever the right word is. Like he's grown past those things, and they're competently run. And tonight, what you saw was an example of competence. And that's why they're exceptional again.
This is what I would say for Laker fans who need an example, like more of an outside looking in example of what we were talking about a lot during that period, the Knicks, in terms of counting on that Knicks exceptionalism, the Garden, it's New York, the legends, the history that automatically would attract free agents, would automatically get you big ticket players. And it's been obvious for a few decades. No, that's not how it works. Right down to, by the way, the incompetence with James Dolan. And I say that only because there were recent periods where you questioned ownership with the Lakers, you questioned the front office decisions, all of that sort of stuff. The Knicks are a really good example now of what we were talking about then. So, like, for people to really understand why we were preaching the idea of you cannot count on this sort of stuff unless you're good. Now, if you're the Lakers and you happen to be great, again, this can be one mother effer of a tiebreaker when it comes to bringing in players. The idea of, okay, they're great and they're the Lakers, that can get you some big players. Absolutely. But you got to be good first. The laundry is not going to, the laundry won't cut it just by itself.
And so, and we're getting, I realize this is a strange thing perhaps to talk about on opening night after the Lakers lose. But it's important. And I rolled my eyes a lot at this thing because it's just like that kind of thing. Like, oh, Lakers, like if you don't understand why the Lakers were good, and I think the Lakers lost touch with that, then you can't get good again. And as we make fun of Rob and all that for talking about like rolling up their sleeves and doing the work and this and that and whatever. And yeah, some things are kind of laid out to you. LeBron wanted to come play in LA. All the Lakers had to do really was clear the runway. AD wanted to come play in LA. Lakers had to clear the runway by trading a bunch of stuff and making a pie. You still got to do all the other things. And they have. And nights like tonight remind you of what is possible when they do. I think your point is like you have to be good first is really well stated. But when you are, you get nights like tonight. And I was so impressed by how they handled this, and like I said, genuinely moved by my reaction to it, by the players' reactions to it. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was funny looking up. For example, I remember like Quinn Cook, and this was really funny to me. Just it speaks to the moment all of these guys were experiencing. Quinn Cook looked jaw dropped watching his mom and sister, even though by this point he's got to figure, okay, my family member's coming up, like somebody from my family. Likely my mom and my sister is going to be virtually presenting me this ring because I just saw it happen with somebody else. But I think you still don't even quite know what it's going to be until you actually experience it. Also, my favorite part of the whole thing, maybe in terms of just relatable, humanizing moments, even for somebody like LeBron, his three kids sitting there like, Jesus, do we have to do this?
Yeah,
again?
It's like it was supposed to be Taco Tuesday, and now
we get it.
That's like fine. Dad won another ring.
Dad's incredible. He's amazing. We get it. Can I go back to playing Roblox?
Yeah, look, Dad, I've seen the dailies for Space Jam, and I am unimpressed. Like all of that. Like it was LeBron's children being reasonably unimpressed by LeBron.
Yeah, the middle child, I think his name is Bryce. He looked so damn bored, and it was hilarious.
But like if you're LeBron, I mean, I obviously you want your kids to be proud. We all want our kids to be proud of us, and on one level or another. Like when Jared Dudley's son's like, "You inspire me to do great things," and I'm like, what are these salty things coming out of my eyes? But like at the same time, LeBron's got to be like, that means I'm just dad. Like I'm not this thing that's larger than life. That's like, I'm dad. And so I would think that he would think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd ask him, but we're doing this, and so instead of media,
it actually reminded me of a couple of years ago. My daughter in school, they had to do some project where the teacher asked them to name their favorite celebrity. And when I picked her up from school, she told me about it, and she said, "I said you, Daddy." I was like, "Oh wow, that's really sweet of you. That's really great." And she's like, "Well, not really a celebrity, but somebody who's on TV every now and
right?
then." I'm like, "Okay, good talk.
Okay,
We could
we don't
have
need to
just
talk.
left it there.
Yeah,
Thank you."
it's enough. Um,
Like every once in a while, I'll be like, "Hey, look, Daddy's on TV." Like if there's a repeat of Spectrum, she's like,
oh,
"Okay,
my kids
whatever."
so don't give a shit.
Nope,
They could
not
not
even a
be
little bit.
any more indifferent to the random television appearances that I make. They don't. I mean, they don't care. The one time Grace snuck on camera, that they wanted to see the baby, the little one. But the other, no, they don't care. All right, so that's that. So kudos to the Lakers for doing a great job with the ceremony part. The Lakers themselves did a less good job with the game part of it. Where do you want to start with this? Because there are a lot of things, and you don't want to be a prisoner of the moment, and you don't want to jump to conclusions. And again, reminder: the Lakers lost the opener, and I think lost 2 more games in the next 27 that they played last year. But I will say this: I think we had a sort of a mini debate over the weekend with Kelvin, I think, about how much adjustment time this season was going to need relative to last season. One of my big takeaways for this, Frank Vogel said before the game that he felt the team was mentally ready to go out and play and not necessarily physically ready. I think that may be true. I also just think they don't know enough yet. There are enough big differences between last year and this year. Take Marc Gasol swapping out for JaVale and Dwight. That it's just I think it's gonna take a minute. It's different enough this year that I think it's gonna take a minute. Schroeder in the starting lineup is a different deal than Avery Bradley. I think it's gonna take a few games to kind of get it. They're gonna win most of them. It's just gonna be different.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's always, I think, a little bit difficult to gauge a team's performance on ring night if they're the ones getting the rings.
Correct.
Just because that even for veteran teams, even for teams that are going for a three-peat, we watch this with the Lakers. It's a difficult night to focus. Everything
that ring, ring was a honking ring.
Right. Well, you got this just enormous piece of jewelry that takes up like half your fist, even if you're an NBA player.
I don't know why they should have taken them off before the game started, though. Like you shouldn't play with them on, as pretty as they are.
No, I mean, you really want to just show the Clippers what they don't have. That's the best way to do it. Exactly.
Right.
But I mean, that's always considered a difficult night for the rewarded team to play. So I'm keeping that in mind a little bit.
For sure.
Well, we'll see. I think some of this has to do with the actual lineups that they go with, stuff like that. But I'm not as concerned about the actual gelling, in part just because they looked pretty good in the preseason and played pretty well on balance. So
right, but they also weren't playing with it. And again, I'm not even trying to like quibble with your wording. I'm not even concerned. I don't even consider it a concern. Like I'm not even slightly concerned about it.
No, I understand that.
I think it's one of these things that as we talk about this season, it's just going to be a thing. It's just going to be a reality.
Okay. You brought this up in terms of the difference being one of the differences being Avery Bradley functionally in the starting lineup. I mean, Dennis Schroeder functionally in the starting lineup
for Bradley,
for Avery Bradley, because they're very different players. Dennis Schroeder is obviously much more of an offensive force, obviously has the ball in his hands more high usage. He had a terrific debut. Mm-hmm. He played really well, 14 points, 12 rebounds, 8 assists, really, really active. Didn't shoot really well from the field, but by and large, I thought he played really well. I also still maintain I don't think he should be starting. And I think eventually that's where this is going to head, because I just think he has more utility, like more direct utility in that second unit. He and Montrezl Harrell are already playing really well together, and I would want to try to maximize as many minutes possible.
They did look good. They did look good together.
With them together. And there was an interesting thing I noticed tonight that in terms of, I guess, maybe things that will have to be adjusted. LeBron went out tonight. He checked out, I believe it was 5:37 in the first quarter, which is almost to the exact number of when he would check out last season, in the first quarter. And then he came back in with about 2 minutes left in the first quarter, which is exactly how they did it last season. And I guess maybe that does speak a little bit to sort of just figuring out the things that need to be done differently this season or the adjustments that need to be made. But that to me felt a bit of a microcosm of things that could be different if you just played Schroeder off the bench.
Yeah, I mean, it could, and I get less concerned about starting this now because I do think what you're getting at, which is basically how do you maximize the combinations that you want the most. I mean, I think that starts with Gasol, who is in foul trouble.
Yes.
And this was not not in a great matchup either with Serge Ibaka starting for the Clippers as opposed to Ivica Zubac. It's just he's a much more of a you're making Gasol move out on the perimeter a lot more. Ibaka got off to a good start and all this other stuff. Not a great debut. The other two guys had a really nice debut. Gasol not so much. But the first guy off the bench was Harrell, and so you immediately got to start to see that work together. And I think the question becomes like, how do you make that work the best? Does it work best with Anthony Davis on the floor? Does it work better with LeBron? Because you got to figure out how to stagger those guys. I think part of the idea is you keep Davis out on the floor for the rest of that first quarter with Harrell and Schroeder. Or most of the rest of the first quarter, so that you can kind of cover up for any defensive stuff going on. But all of this is stuff that's going to need to be sorted out. Like and they didn't really have a real training camp to do it. They didn't really have a preseason to truly investigate and dive into rotations, because even when LeBron and AD played, the other guys didn't. So that's what I'm getting at when I say it's going to take 10 games, 12 games, 15, 20 to kind of land on the combinations that they need. And, if you throw out the first quarter where they were down by 20, and I agree with you, the ring ceremony plays a lot into that. Most nights they're going to win playing exactly like they did tonight. Most teams they will beat playing like they did tonight. They shot the ball horribly early, turned the ball over too much. And, but as the game went on, they got better.
Well, I mean, you look at the way they got back into this game, and the Clippers are a really good team, as much as, they become really fashionable to dunk on, particularly among Laker fans. They're really good. And despite the just god-awful start the Lakers got off to, the Clippers couldn't bury them. And the Lakers got back into it relatively quickly, despite just, again, getting off to a horrible start. So to your point, if they can do that against the Clippers, against most teams in the league, they're not just going to get back into it. Yeah. They're going to overtake them. They're eventually going to just take complete control of the game.
A fired up Clippers team. These guys, rightly came out, I think, looking to prove a lot. I mean, to say the least, and we'll get to what Paul George said after the game. And I'm still looking for it. If anybody happens to see it on social, the Paul George interview with the TNT guys after the game, which was wildly awkward, send it along because we'll play it. And it was a lot of fun and brings up a lot of the Paul George talking points. But from a basketball standpoint, George was awesome on Tuesday. And 33 points, 13 of 18 from the floor, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. Turned the ball over 5 times, but whatever. Plus 17. He was really good. And it is a reminder that as much as we like to, make fun of him and his playoff performances and some of the stuff he says and all that, he is really good. Yeah. And sometimes with guys like that, it can overshadow, it happened a little bit, I think, with Chris Paul, where he's never made a finals. He can't get out of he can't get to the conference finals. But, oh, by the way, Chris Paul's like one of the greatest point guards that ever played. And he reminded people last year. And so, Paul George reminded people tonight of how good he is or can be. And unfortunately for the Lakers, they were on the wrong side of it.
Yeah, it's also a reminder too, teams that are built like the Clippers that have a lot of wings, particularly ones as good as Kawhi and Paul George, if you look at relative weaknesses for the Lakers, because you and I both consider them the favorites to win this season, we both think that they did a good job this offseason in terms of making their roster better than it was last year.
For sure.
They still don't have a ton of guys to throw at the likes of Kawhi or Paul George that aren't LeBron or AD.
Right. Not at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Not at the same time. And also, too, like at this juncture of the season where you want to be sparing with, both of their minutes, you want to make sure that you're not overtaxing AD and especially LeBron from the beginning. Wes Matthews is a legitimately good defender. He also got ragdolled a lot by Kawhi Leonard. Granted, a lot of players in the league get ragdolled against Kawhi. He's just brutally.
Well, you remember what happened in the opener last year?
Right, with KCP.
Exactly.
Right. And KCP isn't necessarily built for something like that. Paul George, even, KCP, even against somebody like Paul George has a little more size on him, stronger, a little bit longer than him. So it is still, I think, a relative weakness for the Lakers and something that could be exacerbated at times when they're going up against the Clippers. I mean, we'll see how it plays out over the course of a season. It's nothing I think that you necessarily have to panic over because the Lakers still have plenty of advantages that they can exploit against the Clippers. But Paul George going off tonight is a reminder of something like that.
Yeah. And I think you factor that in with, the point of attack defense was a little different. I think, guys who were here last year are used to a different kind of rim protection. And Gasol is a good rim protector, statistically speaking, but he's not the kind of rim protector that Dwight was, that JaVale was, where like there's that shot blocking presence.
Well, especially if he's not on the floor. He only played 12 minutes.
12 minutes, right? but you could see it at the beginning of the game. But when he leaves, it's Harrell or AD. If they're going a little bit small, like the Lakers have significantly less shot blocking this year. Like they blocked a bleep ton of shots last year, and this year they don't. And like there are going to have to be adjustments made in where the Lakers funnel players and how they attack. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, pretend I can break down and, all the defense and how they're going to, but they're going to have to make adjustments because the personnel is different. And, they clearly traded some defensive dominance for a better offensive team. I don't necessarily think they traded a ton of it because I think Danny Green and Wes Matthews, when it's all said and done, will be very similar. Green statistically was a very important part of that defense. But I think Matthews can do that. And I think Green probably would continue to slip in some significant ways this year. But they traded it. They're not as good up the middle as they were last year. Schroeder's not a terrible defender anymore, but he's not great. He's, he doesn't do as many things as Avery Bradley does. And it's just, they're going to have to figure some stuff out that's different. And AD is probably going to have to be a little bit different this year and a little bit more, defensive player of the year, like we talked about with Michael Pina last night. That's going to need to happen. He's going to have to be that guy.
He will. I mean, all of these guys, and it's going to be interesting in this period of the season, just when, Frank Vogel talked after the game about how I'm reading a tweet from Harrison Fagan, who covers the team for Silver Screen and Roll, are going to have to be conservative with their minutes early on this season. We have the depth to do it on LeBron, who played 28, AD 31. So if AD is the best equipped guy to do that, and I don't think anybody would disagree, but you're also looking to keep his minutes relatively low because you're thinking about the big picture, which again, I don't think anybody would disagree with either, then it's going to have to come from somewhere else, or you're going to have to be trying to come up with some type of different strategy that doesn't necessarily involve funneling the way, the Lakers did a ton of that last season, but that's because they always had.
Right, you knew you had Dwight there. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say they always had at minimum one 7-footer out there, or somebody who functioned like a 7-footer, if not two. So you could get away with a lot more funneling at all times. They're going to have to switch some things up a little bit, and probably over the course of the season, as you start really ramping it up, they'll have to compensate for that less and less.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you kind of look at the box score, it's not like the Lakers got lit up. 116 points looks like a lot, but the Clippers shot 47% from the floor, and that includes a first quarter where they kind of didn't miss. And
got a lot off turnovers.
Right. Kawhi was 10 of 26, so they defended him well overall. And George beat him. Zubats going 4 or 5 is a factor there, and all these other things. And the Lakers, like you said, they turned the ball over. Granted, the Clippers turned the ball over a lot too, but the Lakers turned the ball over 20 times or 19 times. That doesn't help. They didn't make a lot of shots. They gave the Clippers a lot of opportunities to kind of get out, and a very energized Clippers team early in the game, a lot of opportunities to get out and run because they kept missing. And they missed open shots, like good, clean, open looks. They just missed them. I think they started like two or 3 of 15 or something from 3-point range. Those are not things that you can do against good teams and expect to come back and win. This game was hardly a disaster.
No,
where like you look at it and go, oh shit, like I didn't like what I saw there. It's just, a bad first quarter that they couldn't quite come back from.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, you mentioned the outside shooting and how much they struggled in the beginning to make those shots. If you look at some of the guys that are supposed to be their outside shooters this season, like they were hoping that Dennis Schroeder could maintain what he did last season, which was a career best from behind the arc. Mm-hmm. He was 2 of 5. That's good.
Yep, but anyway, his first make was a catch and shoot,
right?
Which is one of the things they're counting on.
And LeBron had a couple going in the second half, but then you look at, say, KCP's KCP. I think last season cemented what he's capable of doing. But like Kuz, 1 for 3. Wes Matthews, who's supposed to be doing that, missed both of his tries. Alex Caruso, I will say, as somebody who thought that the small sample size theater of his last season as a two-way player could translate to some hot shooting, I'm starting to grow concerned that was more exception than the rule. I kind of like the way we've talked about Kuzma his rookie year versus what we've seen from there. Because Caruso, frankly, misses a lot of open shots. He misses a lot of open outside shots. And, it doesn't take away from his utility as a player because he is just a really, really good defensive player. He's very smart on the floor. I think he will continue to be trusted by Frank Vogel, particularly in closing moments of tight games. But I am growing a bit concerned about the idea that just in a perfect world, Caruso becomes like a 3-and-D guard, essentially. And that end of it just has not been consistently surfacing for him. I recognize it's one game.
No, but there's not evidence yet. Yeah, there's not evidence yet that he's a great shooter, or even a particularly good one.
No. And, if he's not going to be that, then he needs to start aggressively looking to drive more. He needs to start using that, sneaky athleticism to try to get towards the rim more, to try to.
As a white guy, that's something we rely on.
Oh, well, I mean, we're allowed to say it. But what you don't want to have happen, though, with Caruso is to see him turn into what the Lakers have with Steve Blake, where, Blake is a much better pure point guard than Caruso at this stage. He's a much better table setter, much better playmaker. And I think Caruso is a better defender than Blake was. Blake worked hard and he could be pesky, but I think Caruso is actually better than he was. But both of them have that commonality beyond being little white guys with some interesting hair choices or interesting hair issues. Neither one of them were ever a threat to score. And, at Steve Blake, at times, you would watch him being like, dude, put up a fucking shot.
Steve Blake was comparatively to Caruso, was a much better offensive player. And but I think that gets to what you're getting at with Caruso.
I don't know, man. He actually.
I'm not. I know exactly what you're saying, but keep talking. I'm gonna like Steve Blake had games where he scored and shot.
No, only against the Lakers, not with the Lakers. Only against the Lakers.
Don't those count though?
No, I'm talking about when they were with the Lakers specifically. Yes, you are correct. When Steve Blake was with the Clippers, including the last game of the season where he had a triple-double, which I think gave the Lakers the idea to sign him because he had him against the Lakers, with the Blazers, with Denver. Yeah, he would score more. With the Lakers, he basically stopped shooting.
Right.
And he became somebody that you didn't need to guard. And I get concerned at times that is going to be Caruso. because he doesn't hit a lot of outside shots, but he also at times I think doesn't look enough to put up shots, period. Like he needs to be accountable.
Yeah, it's they I think you look around the roster and they should be a better, more consistent three-point shooting team this year than last year. But, I mean, a lot of I think what do you think about this? Because, they talked about it on the broadcast tonight and Vogel's talked about it, like the idea that, look, Anthony Davis, you can get out there, you can take more. We only took 2 3-pointers tonight. The expectation is he's going to take more of them this year. It took about 3 and something last year. That could bump up to 4 or 5. If he takes more of them, the volume goes up. Does he hit them at 36%, 37%, or does it go down to 31 or 30%? Like that's a big deal. More volume for Davis with threes. How does that impact his percentage? LeBron's going to shoot a lot more threes this year. Gasol is going to take more threes than the centers took last year to the extent that he shoots. Schroeder should be.
Assuming he stays on the floor for more than 12 minutes. Tonight, by the way, does not prove your theory because not only did Marc Gasol not take more threes than Dwight or JaVale, he didn't take any shots.
He didn't take any shots.
So again, this night did not prove your theory, but I agree with you.
It did not. This was not like we talked about. Schroeder, 14 points, 12 rebounds, 8 assists. Pretty good debut. Montrezl Harrell, 6 of 7 from the floor, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, 17 points, 5 of 7 from the free throw line. Pretty good. Not a good debut for Marc Gasol.
No,
not a good. 0 for 0, 0 points. He did have a rebound. He did have an assist. He also had a turnover and 5 personal fouls. It was not a good one for him, and not a great night for Wes Matthews, who also didn't score. So, but what does Kuz do? He was 1 of 3 tonight. Not a great game. A couple buckets late that didn't really matter, but he wasn't particularly good. So there are going to be moments where you do still wonder, where is the shooting going to come from? But go back to the Davis point though. Is it a good thing if he's taking more threes? Do you think, both for the offense and for him?
For Anthony Davis?
Yeah.
Do
you like the idea of that jumping from 3 to 5, basically?
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of Anthony Davis attacking from anywhere on the court because he can. And in a lot of ways, I think he should, because if you really have to start worrying about him from out there, then I think it can open up a lot of different options, not just for himself personally, because if you have to start figuring out, okay, how close do I actually guard him if he's going to be taking that type of shot? Because I know he can put the ball on the floor and he's becoming a better playmaker, and he certainly is just capable of taking it straight to the rack, and also too, I think it opens up options if he's somebody that from the high post you have to account for as a passer, that sort of thing. Like the more he screws with your head in terms of all the different things he can do, the better. And I don't worry about Anthony Davis becoming the version of Joel Embiid that I don't like, which is when he camps out along the line. And I think he's doing teams a favor because Joel Embiid is so much better around the rim than he is from outside. I mean, he can make those shots, but I feel like when Embiid is putting up threes, he is doing the opposition a favor. I don't feel the same way with Anthony Davis. I think he's a better outside shooter, regardless of what the raw stats are compared to each other. I've seen Anthony Davis make way more important outside shots than I've seen Joel Embiid do. I'm good with that. I don't want him taking 9 a game, but I'm good with him taking 5 a game. I think assuming he's putting him down at a decent clip, I got no issues with that at all.
Yeah, me neither. And we in last night's show with Michael Pini talked about step back threes and others. To me, that is the difference between. And I love Joel Embiid. I love watching him play. I do think he needs to grow up a little bit, and and if he says a lot of the right things without actually doing those things. By most reports, in terms of really the next level stuff that you do to really truly be a superstar. Relies too much on his natural ability. But yeah, I think he does get too content to just sort of float on the perimeter, falls in love with a 3 because he can hit them. And I think it's fun, but it's different than the swagger that AD has when he takes and makes threes. He's a better shooter than Embiid. But there is a swag that comes with his ability to do that stuff and then put the ball on the floor and attack that is important. So as long as the efficiency is reasonable, and it's going to go, even if it goes down a little bit, I do agree with you. I think it opens up other things that make him more effective.
Well, there's also too, I think it plays into the interchangeability that LeBron and AD have together that Simmons and Embiid, using them as an example, don't have. I mean, there are more limitations that Embiid and especially Simmons have as players comparatively to LeBron and AD. So I think that's a big difference. What else stood out to you tonight in turn? I mean, like seeing Dennis Schroeder not just set up team. I thought the 12 rebounds, that to me is something that like would have had, if there had actually been fans in that building, is something that I think they would have picked up on and would have loved. Like there's something symbolic, I think, about Schroeder and Harrell both getting double doubles in their debut, but both of them hitting the glass. You know what I mean? Because you're talking about two guys that were the winner and runner up for sixth man of the year. And with sixth man of the year, you're always thinking about scoring first and foremost, which makes sense because that award is always given to a scorer off the bench. But seeing those two guys do things that weren't scoring, Montrezl Harrell had a phenomenal pass from the high post hitting Kuzma.
Yeah, that was a good one.
That was spectacular. Both of them, I thought, really, really had very strong debuts, which again speaks to why I really think they should be playing Schroeder off the bench. And I think it matters. I really do.
I understand. I understand. And they may eventually get to that place. I don't think I haven't seen enough. And I firmly believe you can tweak your rotations in a way that ultimately the time on the he's gonna probably play 30 to 35 minutes a night. And it's a matter of arranging them. Tonight he only played 28, but it's just a matter of arranging them, and I think they'll get to that. But to the other question you were asking, it was a little bit like, for me, it was a little bit like the preseason where it didn't look whole and it didn't look complete, but you could see why the Lakers felt they needed to make the changes that they made in terms of adding the energy and the offense of Schroeder and Harrell. And you could see what was different. Like, we don't know yet where they are 71 more games from now, but you can see that they're different. You can see Harrell gives them something that they didn't have last year. They had offensive rebounding with JaVale and Dwight. What they didn't have, though, was, Harrell, for all of his size and activity, can put the ball on the floor a little bit. He can move around a little bit. Like, there's stuff he can do that those guys couldn't as an offensive player. He's not just go grab an offensive rebound, slam it back home. That there's more to his game than that. And then obviously Schroeder is a much more talented offensive player than anybody the Lakers had in the backcourt last year. And it's just, it's plain. And those differences are going to be really helpful for the Lakers over the course of the season, particularly as you've made a right point out of, particularly in the regular season. And you can see where they're different. And I think those differences are improvements. We'll find out. But, the other thing I would say to this, Andy, is if LeBron didn't have a great game, he was 7 of 17 from the floor. AD was okay, 18 points, needed 15 shots, only took 2 free throws, which I think is indicative of sort of the off nights for Davis. When he's really on, he takes 8, 9, 10 free throws a game. It's why I made him my top draft pick in my fantasy draft. He didn't have that tonight. The Lakers didn't get to the line very much tonight. Like stuff like that, I think, is really going to be what drives wins and losses. It ultimately still comes down to what did LeBron and AD do. And tonight they were okay, but they weren't great. And as a result, they didn't win.
It's going to be interesting. And obviously this is one game. And Frank Vogel has said that he's using these early games to, try to spell LeBron and AD a few extra minutes if he can, not overtax them, but also figure out the combinations that work. He played 11 guys tonight and gave 11 guys reasonable minutes. Obviously everyone can't play 25 minutes a night, but nobody in that 11-man rotation.
The YMCA.
Right. I mean, nobody in the 11-man rotation got fewer than 11 minutes. At some point, he's going to have to pare that down a bit. Even though Frank Vogel, by his own admission, loves playing a large rotation, 11 men is a lot. That's a lot of dudes to not just find space for on the floor, but find enough space where they can actually get a rhythm and, and actually start playing off each other and building that synergy together. At some point, at minimum, it's going to have to go down to 10, which would, again, still be a very big rotation. It's going to be interesting to see exactly how that shakes out.
I think what happens is it looks a lot more like it did last year, where Troy Daniels goes 2 weeks without barely playing and then has a stretch of 3 games where he plays a lot, relative to none. I think that's what you're going to see, where like on any given night, it's down to 9 or 10, but the 9th or 10th guy changes, maybe Gasol. And also too, some of this will be worked out naturally because LeBron's going to need a night off, first of the night of a back-to-back. AD is going to take a night off and all these other things. So there will be natural ways to work guys in and give them 20 minutes. Like I think THT is a great example of that. Like they want him to play, but figuring out how you play THT, but you also play Wes Matthews, but you also play Alex Caruso, but it ain't easy.
No, it's not easy. And you're correct that there's going to be guys who in some ways serve as like a situational lefty for those type of contexts that you're talking about, where somebody needs a night off, knock on wood, but it's inevitable, COVID, things like that, regular injuries. But at the end of the day, you still have to come up with a rotation. It's going to be interesting to see what Frank Vogel does.
Yeah, also, I think it's going to be, I not to jump on it, but I don't think it's going to be a classic rotation of you can expect these 8 guys, these 9 guys, these 10 guys to play, and it's going to be like that every night. I think it's going to be like it was last year, where the Lakers did not have a set rotation. They didn't have a set fourth quarter. They didn't have a set fourth quarter lineup. Like relative to most teams, the Lakers.
I don't agree with that.
No, I think they mixed and matched a lot last year in terms of lineup combinations.
But it was always the same. But it was largely the same people, though. Like when Troy Daniels, who, by the way, you mentioned Troy Daniels. I want to point this out quick because this was a great part of the ring ceremony and a really classy moment by the organization and Jeannie Buss specifically when she spoke to nobody in the building, unfortunately, but spoke to the audience. She mentioned the Lakers that were not with the team, and she included Troy Daniels and DeMarcus Cousins, who obviously did not finish the season with the Lakers. That was great.
Yeah,
I was really happy to see that because both of those guys were very popular in that locker room, very well liked and respected. Obviously
didn't play a game. Like, at least Troy Daniels suited up,
right? And I just thought that was really cool. I thought that was a really that's paying attention to the details in ways that really pay off. So I just wanted to bring that up for people who didn't actually see the ceremony. But it was.
I understand your point.
Typically the same players, though, even if the combinations were different. Troy Daniels and Quinn Cook or Jared Dudley pretty much only played out of necessity. They didn't play because Frank Vogel was looking to keep them fresh. They played because they had to.
There were the occasional nights where those guys would play instead of, Caruso, or they might, KCP might play a few. I understand what you're saying. My larger point is the Lakers swapped out their lineups a lot. They didn't have a set fourth quarter lineup like many teams do. They didn't have a every night where you can kind of predict, save foul trouble, that this guy's going to play probably 15 minutes. This guy's going to play 18. Like, some of those things moved around a lot, and Vogel was very liberal, I think, to the benefit of the team, as we saw in the bubble with, where they really started to do that, like changing up lineups, like to the point where like they had a different starting lineup every night. Like all of that stuff played into how they were able to do it in the playoffs. I just think you're going to see a lot of that this year, and I in the beginning of the season, it will include more players. And as the season goes on, it probably will look like last year, where the same 9 or 10 guys play in different combinations. But I think he's going to be experimenting a lot this year. They haven't had time to figure out how some of these new pieces fit together. They have to happen in the regular season.
You mentioned you wanted to get into the Paul George post-game interview on TNT.
Yeah. So, most people I think have seen this if they've been following the social media since the end of the game. But Paul George sat down with the TNT guys after the game, and I think I'm sure he's answered this question about the chemistry thing and the reports by people like Jovan Buha at the Athletics talking about special treatment for Kawhi and Paul George and how that became a problem. I don't think he was expecting to be asked that by Kenny Smith or Charles Barkley at the end of this. So, I'm assuming he's answered this question before, but he seemed unprepared for it tonight. Asked the question, he kind of went into this thing of, the guys, and again, if you have it, send it to us. The guys who put in the time and put in the preparation, yeah, we get special treatment. And I think what he meant was to get, and he said it even to get to the level that we are, meaning the superstar level, the guys who are the max guys, the team, the best players in the team, or whatever. Those of us who put in the work and put in the time and to become what we are, essentially, yes, we got special treatment. It was one of the most awkward and bad answers to that question that I think you could have come up with. Because, Andy, you would agree, nobody expects the superstars to be treated like the 11th guy, the 12th guy, or 13th guy on the roster, correct?
No,
or should they?
No, they have to be held accountable, like this, in the exact same way that the 11th or 12th man would be, because otherwise you can't take them seriously as franchise faces or leaders. Like that's, we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of weeks. I think that is a big issue with James Harden. James Harden has gotten all of the star treatment without any accountability from Houston, and power without accountability in any scenario, much less the NBA, is a bad thing. It is a recipe for things going sideways.
And that is essentially what was the problem with the Clippers, is that there wasn't enough accountability for what those guys were doing. Not that they were tearing the team apart, out doing James Harden strip club stuff, but it just, that it's one thing to have special treatment. It's another thing. You still got to fit the culture, and you got to be the hardest working guys out there. You got to be the first in, last out, and all these other things, and demonstrate to the rest of the team that,
they were definitely last out when it came to post-game interviews.
That's true.
They were absolutely the last man out.
I'm not sure that's what they meant.
Well,
so it was a very, George is not good at this. He's just not. And I understood what he was getting at, but even he was sort of wrapping the towel around himself and kind of it's a simple answer. In the NBA, not everybody is treated exactly the same, but and then he was but nobody's talking about it was an incredibly awkward moment. It actually started an argument between Kenny Smith and some of these other guys on the set of wait, what? They were so surprised by his answer. And it gets to, I think, one of the lingering problems that we're going to see with the Clippers this year. It's who.
Agreed. Look at Steve Mason at 710 ESPN LA. He gets 300 vacation days a year. That is true.
But he negotiated that into his contract.
And he is, I think, the biggest star at 710. So that's why this happens. He is certainly one of the biggest stars, if nothing else. But Ireland would do that, except he's a workaholic. He's addicted to work.
He doesn't even want to take the days off.
No.
But I think it gets to one of these things that you've been talking about with the Clippers and others have talked about. The Lakers have LeBron. LeBron can do all the really important talking for that team can be done by LeBron. AD is getting better at it. And you have supporting guys like Wes Matthews is a veteran, and Gasol, who's a veteran, and guys who have won rings and all that kind of stuff. Now they all have, The Clippers don't have that guy, because it's not, Kawhi, when he goes out and gives interviews, that's not really and George isn't good at it. And those are your two stars. And so to some degree, to whatever degree this becomes an issue, Doc did all of that last year.
Well,
I don't know if Ty Lue will or won't, but it is a thing where sort of from a cultural standpoint, the two stars are not good spokesmen.
I think it'll help having Serge Ibaka there, because he's both a respected veteran and somebody who's won a championship and somebody who is very close to Kawhi Leonard. That's one of his best friends. He's somebody that I think understands Kawhi extremely well. And I don't mean this to be denigrating, but I don't think Kawhi is an easy guy to understand. That's just sort of his nature. I think it helps to have somebody like that.
I think his teammates like him, and it's a bit like in terms of public.
It's not a matter of liking or not liking. It's a matter of just true. I don't think he's an easy guy to get close to.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
And he's not, I think, he is not a natural leader in the way leadership is often traditionally defined with front-facing athletes. That doesn't mean that he can't provide any type of leadership at all, but there are certain things that you expect from a franchise face, like being that sort of public voice that just doesn't come naturally to Kawhi Leonard. He also, though, I mean, if you read a lot of the reporting that Jovan Buha did last year when he was covering the Clippers for The Athletic, this year he's now part of the Lakers coverage, but he wasn't communicative enough with his own teammates. It's one thing not to express a lot of stuff with media, but if you are kind of that much of a opaque presence with your teammates too, that can start becoming problematic, especially if it seems at times like you are absent or just not around for everything that happens.
Commuting from San Diego,
right? Which I don't have an issue with it on its face. I mean, if he's showing up on time, whatever, he can make whatever.
Driving, though. I don't know why you would. I mean, I get it; that's where he's from, but that's a lot of driving.
I mean, it's what he wants. If he can make it work out, whatever. It seems weird as hell to me. It seems like years ago. I mean, to put this in perspective, I used to wait tables at Chin Chin, and I had a manager, he didn't even own the place. He was a manager, making manager money at Chin Chin, which I'm sure was, not life-changing money. He used to commute from San Diego. He used to commute to San Diego every day for that job. So if he's willing to do that for Chin Chin manager, God bless Kawhi.
That's fair. That's fair.
Mean, but it comes down to, in a lot of ways, about accountability. You know what I mean? Like there's an accountability. Part of that is doing the things that are uncomfortable for you because you need to do it. Like Kobe, over the course of his time as really the true face of the Lakers, I think he took on accountability and leadership by just starting to do the things that came less naturally to him when it came to relationships with his teammates, because he began to discover these are the things that I have to do. It's not enough to just display Mamba mentality and outwork everybody. I need to reach these guys. And he got better at reaching them.
Got better at it. Yeah. I mean, it was never natural, I think, for him, but he got better at it.
He got better at it because he started to realize I have to do it. And, James Harden, there's accountability that he needs to recognize. I have to do this if I'm going to be a star player. I think there are certain elements of leadership that Kawhi and Paul George are going to have to recognize they need to do as well.
It's an interesting contrast when you have, like Kyrie Irving tonight, I think reminded, it's just a quick reminder. He hasn't played a lot. It's been like months since we've seen, like, KD looked great.
Yeah, he did. Happy to see that.
Kyrie, by the way, who also missed a lot of games with injury, this and that and whatever. Also, reminder, he's weird, and he's, he did the flat earth thing, which he says was a joke, and he's doing the incense thing this year and the sage, and like clearly going out of his way to make you believe and understand that he's a different guy. But he's really effing good. And tonight with Brooklyn, we got a reminder of that. But the other TNT interview tonight was KD, who basically was non-communicative with Charles Barkley and these guys. And so you look around the league, and it's an interesting experiment this year and how much this stuff matters in terms of the forward-facing stuff, because you're right, it is much more important how Kyrie and KD are accountable inside their own locker room. It is much more important as to how George and Kawhi are accountable inside their locker room. But a lot of the stuff that ends up inside the locker room is based on those forward-facing things, and like what ends up in the media, and
okay,
questions and stuff. And so
you want an example?
It becomes a good experiment.
If you want a good example of it, we saw it with LeBron's first season with the Lakers when he was very outwardly disconnected with the team, very openly lobbying for Anthony Davis to become his teammate, despite the fact that guys like Ingram and Lonzo, Kuz, Josh Hart, they're all just being hung out to dry and clearly bugged by it. LeBron, his first season with the Lakers, I don't think was a particularly good leader for that organization. Second year, he was phenomenal. I think he's going to continue to be a phenomenal leader. And when LeBron is in that sort of mode and takes on every single facet of accountability, that means the world to your organization because he's the best player in the league. And he's, among the best players to ever play the game. So if he's taking on all forms of accountability, and this is the added bonus to somebody like Anthony Davis being comfortable holding LeBron accountable, there's just a trickle-down effect for the entire team. But, you and I have talked about this for the last couple months, and we saw a reminder of it tonight. If the Clippers take all of the lessons that they should from last season, not really maximizing opportunities and then just crapping the bed in the playoffs, they're going to be really good. They have a lot of talent. Yeah. They're going to be, at the very least, able to push the Lakers.
It is, I think the Lakers are better, but let's say the Lakers are, 60-40 over the Clippers. That's still reasonably tight. Like, you wouldn't get on an airplane if there was a 40% chance of it crashing. Like, you're not doing that. 60-40 is pretty tight. Let's say it's 70-30. That's not a walk for the Lakers, like in a playoff series. I mean, I don't want the Clippers to be bad, and I realize that may be an unpopular position with some people on who watch our show. I want the Clippers to be good because I want that Western Conference Finals, and I want it to be competitive, and I want it to be fun. And the Clippers organization is filled with a lot of really good people. I like Kawhi. I like watching Paul George play. I like Serge Ibaka. Like, I like players on that team, and I want them to be good. And they are. I mean, it's a really good team. I think the Lakers are better. I think they will prove to be better over the course of the year. But I mean, the gap isn't that big.
No, I mean,
between the Lakers and some of these other teams.
No, not at all.
As somebody who said it's pretty significant, it's not overwhelming. Like, we can just not bother playing the rest of the year.
So they play again Friday. That's the next game, Christmas. I'm really curious because we saw, Kawhi at times ragdolling certain guys. Paul George obviously got loose. I'm going to be really interested to see just what they do against Luka and how they look to scheme against him, because it's been a while since they've gone up against that guy. And he's had some good games against the Lakers.
Yeah, and I think he will again. I mean, they struggled a little bit with Dallas last year, and it's no Porzingis yet, correct? He's not. I think he's working out like 5-on-0, but he won't be cleared by Christmas. That makes obviously a huge difference with playing the Mavs, who are another sneaky good team in the Western Conference. Like, it's the Lakers, it's the Clippers. I think you can put the the Nuggets in there, and like 8 really good teams.
Porzingis is listed, by the way, really quickly, as out for Wednesday for Wednesday's game, the Dallas's opener. It doesn't appear. I've assumed he's going to be out for a while. I haven't.
I think I read again. I had my fantasy draft the Monday, and so I was looking through all of these guys. Like, when is it safe to take Kristaps Porzingis? And when you take him off, like, Hardaway has been sneaky good. Very curious to see what Josh Richardson looks like or whatever. But like, just from a structural standpoint, obviously the Mavs are a much less threatening team offensively when Porzingis doesn't play, and defensively for that matter. And so, Luka with Porzingis, with Hardaway, Richardson, and Dorian Finney-Smith or Maxi Kleber or whoever else, Dwight Powell, whoever else they put in there, is a different deal than the 4 role guys with Luka. But I think you'll see LeBron on him. I think you'll see AD on him a lot. I think it's one of those deals where you just throw a bunch of people at him. I'm not even sure the Lakers are that concerned about that stuff right now, though. Anyway, I think their first 15, 20 games, cliche as Frank Vogel makes it sound, it really is going to be, we're focused on us and trying to figure out the best way for us to be operating. I think night to night, almost independent of their opponent.
I love Frank, and he's a prince of a person. He's a wonderful human being. 95% of what he says, he makes sound like a cliche. So in that sense, you are likely correct.
Yeah, and except this one, I think he means it, and he lied.
Yeah,
I mean, look, I mean, he's no different than any other coach.
We got spoiled by Phil. We really got spoiled by Phil in that sense.
Yeah, but like, I mean, all coaches lie, and Frank Vogel lies. He lies really nicely.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
he lies. Does he lie, or does he just omit truths?
No, he lies when he says he doesn't know who the starting lineup is. He absolutely
knows. That's true. He does.
Frank Vogel is like a super preparer. Do you think like 30 minutes before a game, he's like, I'm not quite sure who's starting. You know, we'll figure it out when the time comes. No, come on, man.
No, he knows who's starting. But he lies about things. But in this one, I actually think he's telling the truth, and the cliche is true. The Lakers are really genuinely going to be more focused on themselves and just figuring out their own stuff over these first 15, 20 games than they are really concerned about individual. Not that they won't scout and prepare and have game plans, but you understand what I'm getting at. So yeah, I think we're going to be talking about this kind of stuff for 3 weeks. We just are. And like, you know, I wonder if they're going to start tinkering with this lineup or that lineup, or who's going to start. This is going to be at least a month of this before it seems like it's settled. Well, that's my guess.
Tell you right now, based on what I'm seeing in the chat, based on what I'm seeing on the Twitter, the natives are going to get restless if it's just a month of tinkering.
Here's the thing, but they won't. They'll get restless if they're losing. They lost tonight. I think 20 games are going to look up, and it's not going to be super firm, but they're still going to be.
Have you met these people?
Yeah,
have you met these people?
That's true.
Come on.
I think they're going to be. If they're 14-6 after 20 games, I think that'll be okay. They're 10-10 pitchforks.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. At any rate, it was obviously a loss for the Lakers, but a really great night in terms of putting a bow on the championship. Next game, Friday, Christmas, against the Mavericks. Actually really looking forward to that one. Luka's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be fun. Reminder, Delicious Pizza, 20% off when you tell them the Cam Brothers sent you 2 locations, and West Adams and on Sunset in Hollywood, thanks to the folks at betonline.ag. Go gamble there. Like, if you're going to put money down, do it with the folks at betonline.ag. Tomorrow night on the late night happy hour, Rowan Nardkani from Sports Illustrated wrote just a fantastic feature on Anthony Davis for their basketball preview issues, wrote about Jimmy Butler. So we'll do just, again, more NBA tomorrow. Last show before 2020 is over. So we'll go out with a bang, and we will see everybody tomorrow night.
Yep.